All right, everybody. Good afternoon. I just got myself. Actually, I was at the Societas Magica conference, meeting up with Dana Trell, which was really a hoot. It was great to meet him. He's such a great guy. So just literally pulled in just a minute ago and up for live stream. So welcome, folks. Welcome to our sort of monthly Esoterica live stream. I try to create content, 3 weeks in a row, and then take a week off, and do a live stream as opposed to creating new content. So this is one of those weeks. Although I have to say, I'm kind of feel quite a bit run down, mostly because I was up really late last night. But at any rate, this is a great opportunity for me. I really love these live streams because I get to hang out with you guys and take some questions and talk about some of the recent content we've uh, created. And yeah, I mean, I will say that the last content creation cycle was a ton of fun. I got to work with Dr. Angela Puka on the Liber Juratus, or the Sworn Book of Honorius, which I have to say that it's one of those grimoires where grimoires in general aren't terribly intimidating. At least to me, the content's often not technically or intellectually terribly challenging, but without a doubt, the Liber Juratus is, along with the Enochian material, hands down the most technically complicated texts in the history of magic. So yeah, I really wanted to cover it, and I'm glad that I did. And I have to say that that text was, again, a lot more complicated than I thought it would be. And but hopefully, it ended up being a 40-minute episode, and that was yeah, that's what it took. And I'm glad that I got it done, and I think ended up being a pretty good episode. And yeah, again, always a pleasure to work with Dr. Puka. If you ever get the chance to go over to her channel, she has really great stuff. She has a new class coming out on the history of the left hand path, which is going to be really great. So when that goes live, you should sign up and take her class. She's a really great teacher, and we benefit from it. Yeah. Also, what else do we do? We did the part 2 of our ongoing Paracelsus series, which Paracelsus is just so weird and difficult and complicated, but we got into the Paramirum, and there'll be at least another episode on the Paramirum because I want to cover his medical stuff on women, and also the stuff on invisible diseases, and that goes with psychological and spiritual diseases, and of course that dovetails quite nicely with Paracelsus and magic, like the Archidocious of Magic, which I've covered already in an earlier episode. But again, always great to turn back to Paracelsus. I think he's one of these characters in the history of esotericism, a bit like Agrippa, actually, which I'll talk more about Agrippa in just a minute, about the upcoming Agrippa class. That everyone talks about Paracelsus, but I don't think anyone really reads him. And you can tell that no one really reads him because he gets name dropped a lot, because obviously he has an incredible name. But no one ever talks about his actual theories, and no one ever talks about sort of what he's actually up to. And so actually getting into Paracelsus from a technical point of view has been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot, and I hope that folks find it interesting. And of course, the elephant in the room was the recent episode on Karl Marx and any influence on the occult on Karl Marx. Not Marxism. Marxism is a very complex and divergent, uh, often mutually unintelligible system of beliefs. Um, but looking at the actual influence or potential influence on Marx, and there's not a lot there, frankly. There's not a lot there on at least Marx himself, despite the fact that every anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist desperately wants Marx to be sort of wrapped up in the occult somehow. There's just very little evidence for that. It's also just like I love the sort of anti-hagiography that happens with Marx, with revisionist people, fascist people, where they just come up with all these interesting bizarre ideas that his father was a rabbi or whatever. I don't know. It's fascinating to look at those and then realize they don't really come to anything. So, although I will say I got a great message from Glenn Alexander McGee, and really challenging some of the interpretations that I gave for the relationship of Hegel and esotericism. And so, yeah, I'm going to go back when I do the episode on Hegel and hermetic, Dr. McGee, and get his vision on things, because since he's written Hegel and hermeticism, he's actually written several other papers apparently where he's updated his arguments and deepened them a good bit. And so I'm looking forward to getting him on the channel and talking with him. So yeah, so look forward to that. I do look forward to the episode on Hegel and hermeticism. I love working with Hegel, although I will say that my friend John has a theorem about Hegel, that it's impossible to talk about Hegel in public without sounding like a jackass, and that's definitely true. It is impossible to talk about Hegel in public without sounding like a jackass. It's absolutely the case. So so yeah, I look forward to doing the one on Hegel, mostly because it's just so much fun. So all right, what else is going on? Oh, the Agrippa class. I should mention to the update on the Agrippa class. I was hoping to get home earlier to write something to Patreon folks about sort of an update on it, and I just walked in the door. They closed down the main highway on the way here, and so it was delayed getting back. I didn't go back as early as I wanted to, but the update is this: the first series of slides is actually done. So I need to what I need to do is, and it's a lot of slides. It's going to be at least a couple lectures. So the first section of lectures is actually already written down and done. I actually wrote it on the way to Oregon. I was in Oregon a couple weeks ago, or last weekend. But I'll mention that because I had a cool hangout there as well. But what I'm going to do is get those transferred into actual slides and get them illustrated, and then I'm going to pitch that over to Patreon folks on Patreon, which they'll have access to all the lectures live. It'll eventually all be published on the channel, but everything will be all the live lectures and the Q&A will be accessible first and foremost to Patreon people, and then they'll decide sort of when those lectures happen. I have a pretty limited, unfortunately, amount of places where in the week where I can do them, and then we'll just get going. I'm really hoping to get the first lectures going here, hopefully by the end of May. So at any rate, yeah, the Agrippa class is really underway. I will say, and again, I have like Agrippa just like right here next to me. And so I will say this: it's actually proving much more difficult than I thought it would be, just because the main thing is that Agrippa wrote a lot of stuff about the occult that is not in the 3 books of occult philosophy. And I don't know how this is a thing that doesn't get more airtime, but there's a half a dozen books of various sizes that Agrippa wrote that are not in the occult philosophy, and you have to read those if you're going to do a class on Agrippa's sort of overall thinking and his overall occult philosophy. And these include lectures on the Pymander and Hermetica and his book 3 Ways of Knowing God. So he has a lot that he's written, and none of it's translated. And so, with the exception of the declamation on female preeminence and things like that, and the De Incortudine has a really old early modern English translation. But the problem with teaching Agrippa is that you just have to read the rest of the stuff that he wrote, and none of it's translated. So a big part is just sort of sight translating a bunch of Agrippa in Latin and getting that material put together. Now, the Charles Nauert text certainly helps, but it's no substitution for reading it. The good thing, however, is that Agrippa's Latinity is really clean, and so he's actually quite a lovely writer. He's nice to read. His Latin is very great. It's a nice humanistic Latin, and so basically what I've been doing is reading the half a dozen other texts that Agrippa wrote on hermeticism and esotericism in order to get ready for things. So all that's to say, yes, the Agrippa class is coming soon, maybe starting as early as in the next couple of weeks. And when it gets going, you'll see again, Patreon folks will have access to it first. They'll have access to it live, and they will have the live Q&A for folks who want to do it on Patreon. And I'll mention this in a video coming up soon. And then it'll get released to the general audience, because I don't believe in paywalls, even for classes. And this is why it's so important for me to be able to do what I do, is that you guys support what I do, either through Patreon or through other kinds of means, buying merch or whatever, and that allows me to teach all this stuff for free. So as long as I'm able, and I don't know how long I'll be able to do it, but basically, as long as my bills are paid, my kids are fed, and I have the things that I need, it's totally possible for me to be able to provide these classes totally for free. So even with the Agrippa class, there won't be any charge for it. It'll be freely accessible, just like the Kabbalah class. And so with the Kabbalah class, that was instantly accessible to everybody. And as long as I'm able, I'm not going to paywall anything. And of course, that's totally because I have the support of my Patreon folks and other folks who make the channel work. And so, yeah, when I get to the actual pitch for the Patreon for the Agrippa class, I'll mention that. But yeah, so hopefully all the content I make here on Esoterica will be totally free and accessible to anybody, basically with a phone. And that's the way I want it to be. And that's, as long as that's financially possible for me, I'm going to make that happen. So, because I mean, this stuff has been pent up and gate kept so long that insofar as I can keep it and make it free, then I want to do that. I want to do that because I know that when I was younger, I couldn't afford to get access to this kind of material. And I know that there are many people living in all places in the world that don't have the financial resources to pay for an expensive class. Or any class, because there are lots of people who are just poor compared to other places in the world, and poverty should not be a barrier. Financial inability should not be a barrier to getting access to education. And I want to make sure that everybody around the world who's interested in this material can get access to it. And so that means crowdsourcing it out, and it's amazing to be able to get that stuff done. All right. So agenda today, I guess I'm just going to take some questions, and that's it. I'm going to go walk my dog, I think. So yeah, throw your questions in the chat. I mean, folks who obviously put in the super questions with the supers, I will try to get to those. I'll definitely get to those, and I'll try to get to the other ones as well. Hey, Marco, good to see you in the chat. I should also mention I was in Portland last weekend for a conference there with Scholar in Residence for this amazing conference called Reboot. And after I was finished with the sort of Scholar in Residence stuff, I got to hang out with Eric Arneson, who is fantastic. He runs one of the best sort of esotericism podcasts called Ornament. See, I'll put it in the chat. Let me get it in the chat, folks. Because if you like Esoterica, you should definitely check out Eric's podcast. It's like all kinds of great stuff. I was on his podcast early on in the channel and kind of helped get the channel out there. But he was really great to hang out with him. He's a really fantastic guy. I'm just like super kind and super thoughtful. He's recently also done some work on Agrippa, which was really great. So it's really, really fantastic to be able to hang out with him. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, last night, I went over to Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is apparently where they hold every year this giant medieval studies conference that I've never been to. But the Societas Magica folks were there. So got to hang out with some fantastic people, including Dana Trell, the modern hermeticist, Matt Melmushki, like the guy working in Islamic esotericism, and some other really, really amazing people. Got to shake the hand of Robert Kiekefer and thank him for his scholarship. You'll know him. He's the guy that pioneered all of the clerical necromantic underground, or clerical necromantic. That sort of realization that has driven so much of my work, and literally I have merch about the clerical necromantic underground. That's him. He's the scholar that pioneered that kind of research, and it was really a great honor to be able just to meet him and shake his hand and really appreciate him and thank him for his scholarship. So ton of fun, met a lot of great people, great hanging out with Dana Trail, just such a kind, thoughtful, fun person to be around. So yeah, we set up last night and drank cider and absinthe and looked at old books and talked about all kinds of esoteric stuff. So just a fine fellow, Dan. So really a pleasure to meet him and hang out along with several other people. Just great, though was up way past my normal bedtime, which is why I'm going to go take a nap in a little bit. So again, another sort of side great thing about this channel is the fantastic people I've been able to meet. You don't accidentally occult, like you don't accidentally esotericism. You have to, if you're going to get into this stuff, you have to at some level work at it. And I will say that the people who I've met who really put in a lot of work in this material, they tend to just be thoughtful people in general. They're not careless people. They're people who really put in a lot of efforts to study this material. And that kind of thoughtfulness in the realm of esotericism often gets translated into they're just generally thoughtful people. And so it's really a pleasure to get to hang out and meet scholars and practitioners and people sort of in this circuit of studying esotericism, that it's really an honor just to meet so many of these incredible, kind, thoughtful, deep thinking people who have very profound senses of moral conscience. And yeah, it's really an honor. It's really an honor to be able to share space with them. So yeah, hopefully in the future too, I'll be able to spend more time with more Esoterica folks as we take Esoterica out of just YouTube and bring it into some live sessions, which is a thing I have on the agenda starting next year, I think. So more on that later. All right, let me grab some questions here. So you've never mentioned why there is a proboscis on the head of your fish logo. That, close I can tell, is a Mayan bat ear. So you're definitely way off there. So the Esoterica logo is from a Maya glyph. It is a hand grasping a fish. It's a Maya glyph for tzak, which means to conjure, to grab a vision, to have a mystical vision, often induced through bloodletting in the Mayan religion. And I've always loved the image of the hand grasping the fish, because it as much as one grasps, the fish is always slipping out of one's hand. And that's something very evocative of the nature of esotericism and mysticism, that as soon as we think we have a handle on it, it's always already slipping away. And the reason why I picked it was actually learning to read my hieroglyphs, because my partner and I were planning a vacation down in the Yucatan, and I've always had a deep admiration for the Maya, and the glyphs they use were just beautiful, and the language is just so lovely. And so I was teaching myself to read the Maya hieroglyphs, and translating some of the famous lentils that depict some of the bloodletting rituals, which I've done a video about. That glyph just always jumped out at me as being especially evocative and especially beautiful of a language that's already so profoundly beautiful. And so, every other esoteric channel has like Ouroboros or some alchemy thing or some sigil from Agrippa. And I'm like, I wanted to pick something that was not that, but evocative of a similar sense of it. And so the hieroglyph, the Maya glyph, tzak, was the one I ended up picking, just because I find it to be so beautiful. So check out my other episode on the Mayan bloodletting mysticism to learn more about that. All right, grab some more super questions. Why you put both the printed version of the 3 books and the manuscript version in the course for the Agrippa class? So the reason is I believe that, and this is a thing that Patreon folks have access to that other folks don't have access to yet. in the class, for the class, I put up all three versions of the three books of occult philosophy. So I put up the manuscript of the Juvenile Draft from 1510. I put up the first printed edition of Book 1 from 1531, and then the official edition of 1533. Now, I could have been a hardcore completionist and included every version of the 1533. There are 2 or 3 different slightly different printings of the three books of occult philosophy, mostly because the Dominicans tried to have the book banned before it was even printed. And so the Dominicans and the Inquisition had the printing stopped. And from the time that they had it stopped to the time it was actually printed in July 1533, what ends up happening is there are slightly different editions, especially of the first parts of Book 1. It doesn't change anything in terms of the content, but they are slightly typographically different. And so I could have found every version of those, and I didn't do that. In fact, the version I chose to upload for the class is the edition of the exact text of the 1533 three books of occult philosophy that was owned by Jung. So, I mean, what better one could you get? I mean, it's the one owned by Jung. So, so that's the one I have. So that's why there are 3. And I'll be talking a good bit about the Juvenile Draft, the 1510 Juvenile Draft, and how it differs from the 1533 mature final version of the three books of occult philosophy, primarily in how it's different in terms of how much more Kabbalah Agrippa ends up adding. Agrippa learns a lot more Kabbalah. He also gets a lot better access to hermetic text while he's living in Italy. Specifically Lazzarelli's edition of the Corpus Hermeticum, and Agrippa deepens his understanding of Hermeticism, but also he much more so deepens his understanding of Kabbalah, and it's mostly the Kabbalistic stuff that builds out the mature edition of 1533 as opposed to the Juvenile Draft. At any rate, come to the Agrippa class and learn all about that. So that's coming soon. Hi, Ryan from Highland, Michigan. Good to see you. Thank you for the super sticker. I feel like I've just transversed most of Michigan today, going from Kalamazoo all the way here. So seeing a good bit of Michigan today. Okay, Marco Visconti, what's going on, dude? Good to see you in the chat. Yeah, thank you, JL. I'm glad you're getting value from the channel. I really appreciate the super sticker, and I hope you watch more episodes. I just realized the other day, folks, that we're like up over 300 pieces of content on Esoterica. Like, I don't know exactly how many that is. Like, some of those are lives and interviews and things like that. But I think that there are 300 and I forget exactly what I saw, but yeah, 311 videos. And I'm sure that some chunk of that is things like live streams, interviews, but we've actually produced a lot of content. The back catalog of this channel is several hundred videos. And so it took me by surprise. I think I sometimes forget how much content I've made because I'm always forward thinking about, this Agrippa class and this Mechtil de Magdeburg episode and this episode about rune magic from the 17th century and the episode on Set that's coming up, the God Seth. And so I'm always forward thinking and never think about all the stuff I've already done. So yeah, there's a huge library of material. So go watch some of that stuff. But yeah, thank you, and hope you can check out some of the back catalog. Do you see any connection between Marxist internationalism and the topics covered in the perennialism, Platonism, and hegemony lecture that Dan Trell gave? It's an interesting question. I don't think so. I think that what drives Marxist internationalism is very different than what drives something like the universalism of perennialism. They're both universalistic in the sense that they find that it's all about sort of they're both, or I guess I could say they're both discourses of totality. That's certainly true, but in that they're discourses of totality, that's kind of where the similarity ends, because primarily Marxist internationalism is interested in the fact that the unit of social selection is class and not national boundaries. And therefore, because for Marx and Marxism, the unit of social selection is class, that means that uh, national boundaries become impediments uh, to that selection process, and that it becomes a nationalism is just ideology, right? It's false consciousness. Like a German worker has more in common with a French worker than a German worker has in common with a German boss, at least according to sort of Marxist vision of internationalism. That's very different than perennialism, which is holding the idea with an esoteric core of which all religions sort of orbit. They're both committed to some kind of idea of the absolute, but they've gotten there for very, very, very different reasons. Um, yeah, I mean, there's maybe something, and this is a thing that some people have talked about, that German idealism and all of the ideas coming, all the things that are derivative of German idealism, of which dialectical materialism is derivative of German idealism, although it's an inversion of it. They are downstream of this idea of the absolute, and the idea of the absolute is itself downstream from various strands of German mysticism and Jakob Böhme and theosophy and stuff like that. That's certainly true. But again, materialism inverts idealism in a very, very profound way. And so it would be a mistake, I think a profound mistake, to see them as somehow um, that these ideas have gotten their way into Marxism or Bolshevism or something like that, in a way that's direct. And then Bolshevism has its own weird stuff with techtology and Bogdanov and God building. And there's a very distinct Russian form of occultism that that intersects at some level with certain strands of Bolshevism, which were always considered heterodox. And so I'll come back to those in a future May Day episode where I talk about Bogdanov and God building and all that stuff. So there is some more interesting connections there with early Bolshevism. But again, they were always kept at arm's length. You know, Zinoviev and Kamenev and Rykov, um, Trotsky, they didn't have much time for that stuff. Um, they must have thought it peculiar and cute. And so I don't think that, well, as weird and interesting as it was, I don't think it was ever at the center of Bolshevik philosophy. I think it was always a sort of a weird lark on the part of uh, people like Bogdanov. Thank you, Jeanette, for the super sticker. I love the word God building. There's just something about that just sounds so Soviet. Like, we don't believe in God, but we'll build one. It's like the most proletarian theological move ever. What are like proletarian flex? Like, we'll dethrone God and then build a God. I just love the idea of like God being built in a factory by a bunch of like what Bogdanov meant. But just that's a vibe. God building is a vibe. Thank you, JM, for super sticker, man. Thanks for supporting the channel. I'm gonna come back, folks, and try to get some more non-super thanks as well. Is there an English translation of the Sepher Carim, or do you have to learn medieval Hebrew? It's not medieval Hebrew. Sepher Carim, I actually have a copy of it, like right there. I don't know if I can reach it. Hold on. Yeah, I found a copy that's in bad shape. Actually, I think I need to get it rebound. But this is a copy of Sepher Carim. It has other things besides just Sepher Carim in it, and it's kind of falling apart, sadly. But for folks who don't know this, Sepher Carim is one of the most important books about the Klipot. In fact, I basically measure the value of a book on the Klipot with how many times it references Sepher Carim, and if it doesn't reference Sepher Carim, I basically know that the book is not really worth anything. But this is the sort of authoritative book on the Klipot, the sort of shells, the fragments, the world of the Sitra Achra, and this is the main sort of encyclopedia or analysis of the world of the Sitra Achra and the world of the Klipot. Sorry, I'm trying to find it in this book. This book is like so delicate, it's like falling apart, sadly. I mean, it probably needs to be put in a Geniza, but I think I can save it if I just get it rebound. Sharim. Yeah, so here we go. Here's a Sepher Carim. Some pages from it. I don't know that it will show up very well, but this is Sepher Carim. This is the most important book about the Klipot, and it does not have any translation. But it wasn't written in the medieval Hebrew. It's actually written in sort of standard early modern rabbinic Hebrew. And now I will say that just because it's written in relatively standard Hebrew does not mean it's intelligible. It's an incredibly difficult text. I pity the person who attempts to translate it to English, but there is no translation. If you want to learn to read it, you'll have to learn to read the very technical Hebrew that it is written in. But a fantastic book, and very interesting. And again, a good way that I measure. Anytime I read anything about the Klipot and it doesn't mention Sepher Carim, I know that that person has not done their homework. So, all right. But yeah, an absolutely fantastic text, and very, like, again, the just like the Citra Achra stuff is just so wild. It's so wild. But fascinating. How do you access the classes? So the Kabbalah class is it's in one of the playlists. So you just go to the playlist on Esoterica. You'll find the link to the Kabbalah class. The Agrippa class you can't access yet because it's not done. It doesn't exist yet, but it will exist soon. So look for that one. Look for that one coming here in the next few weeks, hopefully. Still interested about the horn-like thing on the fish's nose. Not an original glyph, not explain the blooding. I mean, there's no horn thing on the fish's nose, I don't think. I think that's just the way they draw it. I think it's just like, I mean, the glyphs are highly stylized. And also, by the way, this glyph that I've picked out is just one way the glyph has been written. There's a more vertical sort of version of the glyph that's much more rectangular that that you can find as well. So there are lots of different ways to write this glyph, and the fish sometimes looks less like a fish. I don't know, but there are lots of ways of writing the glyph out, the stock glyph. So if you find yourself in the wild reading Maya, you'll see it, and often it doesn't look exactly like the version that I have. I picked this one because it's square, as opposed to the more rectangular version. All right. Yeah, in a previous conversation, you mentioned how the Christian Trinity can be understood through Aristotelian philosophy. You're willing to explain this? I would say that the Trinity is not just to be understood through Aristotelian philosophy. I say it's to be understood through all of Greek philosophy. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that the Christian Trinity, as it develops in the second and third centuries, is a triumph of Greek philosophy. It is the crowning achievement of Greek philosophy. And so you can't get the Trinity off the ground without an Aristotelian conception of substance. Without an Aristotelian conception of ousia, of substance, there simply isn't a Trinity. It doesn't work because the Trinity is about an economics of ousia, of substance, of being. And the debates that raged around the nature of the Trinity, especially the relationship of the Son to the Father, and whether or not the Son and the Father shared a same substance or were of a different substance, and this is what separated the position of like people like Athanasius from people like Arius, where Arius thought they were not of the same substance. They were homoousios versus homoousios. This huge debate that raged in the 4th century. That's all technical Aristotelian stuff. No, it's Aristotelian stuff filtered through some Stoicism, but ultimately it's all technical stuff to be found derivative of the Aristotelian philosophy. So there's no way the Trinity could have ever worked were it not for the philosophical machinery of the ancient Greek world. And I think I've said this before, I'm sure I have, that one could teach an entire class on Greek philosophy just using the debates around the Trinity. Just using debates around the Trinity. Everything that one needs to know about Greek philosophy is somehow to be encoded inside the Trinity. Now, that could be a flex. That could be a feature where you're like, look how amazing the Trinity is. It has to use all of Greek philosophy to make it work. And you have to really muster all that Greek philosophical technical stuff to make it work. That could be a feature. It could also be a bug. It could also be, this is such rubbish, nonsense idea. You're basically assuming a contradiction that 3 can be 1, and you're just shoving all the philosophy you can at it to make this otherwise completely nonsensical idea work. I'm a kind of like, why not both? I don't think the Trinity makes any sense at all logically, and I think it's a relatively, it's a technically nonsensical notion. And it's just as nonsensical as to me as the spheroid or whatever. All these Henads and Plotinus, all that stuff, all that, this sort of stuff strikes me as just ingenious nonsense, I think is what I said over at Alex's channel. But even if I think it's ingenious nonsense, you have to appreciate the genius of it. You don't get, I don't think you just get to write it off. And so for me, I love reading Origen and Athanasius. I love reading Augustine on the Trinity, because whether I agree with it or not, and I don't, there's something technically and spiritually happening there that is breathtaking, that is awe-inspiring. And even if the ultimate conclusion is not something I believe in, one can go along the way, and going along the way and following the dialectic in the thought of Origen or Athanasius or whatever, that's incredibly rewarding. It's incredibly rewarding. Just like if you might go on a run, you might be going on a run not because you're trying to get anywhere, because you're trying to go on a run. And I kind of will go on a run, intellectually speaking, when I follow then, read Augustine's book on the Trinity or Origin, and I think that's well worth it. I think it's well worth it. I think that I benefit greatly from studying those kinds of texts. So that's a long way of saying all of Greek philosophy, not just Aristotle, was absolutely mustered in the development of the Trinity. Fantastic stuff. Yeah, again, I think I've said this before. That's one of the things that I don't like about the esoteric world, that I've come to realize, is that the intense anti-Christian bias is absolutely stultifying, self-stultifying. That I get it. Like, a lot of people go to esoteric spirituality and the occult because they've been burned by Christianity or have experienced profound trauma at the hands of Christianity. Trust me, I get that. I'm very sympathetic to that. But I think that when you throw the baby out with the bathwater and you really like intellectually, you throw Christianity and its intellectual and spiritual heritage under the bus. If you're interested in the intellectual history of the Western world, and if you're interested in the spirituality of the Western world, and you do that, you've totally undercut yourself. It's like the meme of the guy sticking the rod in the spokes of his bike and falling over him. That's what you're doing if you do that. And I think that throwing Augustine, throwing Athanasius and Origen, and Nicholas of Cusa or whatever, you throw those guys under the bus at your own peril. So I would not do that. Hey, Armando, if you had to choose one book to get someone interested in the field of esotericism, which one would you choose? To get them interested in it, or to get them like academically engaged in the field? I mean, if academically engaged in the field, I would point them to my giant elaborate list of books that I put up just recently, to sort of guide folks through a kind of autodidact's journey through the field. I can throw that link in here real fast if folks want to take a look at the list. I would give them this list basically and say, go do this. If I had to get them to a single book where they would be perhaps interested in the occult in general, I don't know. I'd give them like a cool coffee table book, like the Taschen coffee table books that have all the cool occult alchemical imagery. I would say that if anything is going to fire someone's imagination, it's going to be the imagery associated with esotericism, and that imagery, alchemical imagery, all the old woodcuts of like witches and devils and stuff. That's super evocative imagery. And I would say that the aesthetic into esotericism, or the aesthetic gate into esotericism is huge for most people, whether that's visual arts or music or I don't know, Tool or something. That I would probably have them go in there. So I think that the aesthetics would be the avenue if someone were like, you should study about the esoteric dimensions of spirituality or alchemy or whatever. I'll be like, and here's a cool book with a bunch of amazing, cool pictures of that kind of material. So I think I would go with that direction. But if it were just sort of like the academic study of esotericism, well, I would send them my links to my library things. Nissa, any techniques or advice for better information retention and recall? I guess you could do the Ars Notoria if you wanted sort of a magical practice to do that. I don't know if the Ars Notoria works. I know the Rinsep folks are trying to do some of the rituals around the Ars Notoria to see if that works. So that's kind of cool. But any general advice? I think that the way that I try to do recall is by building like it's the modern equivalent of a memory palace. It's just the cybernetic version of that, where I try to in my mind visualize the things that I know as giant networks and like 3D networks. And so I try to close my eyes and see where an idea or a person sits within that network and sort of like how they're connected to other ideas and how they're connected to other time period and how they're connected to sort of the general world of that time. And sort of like closing my eyes and imagining that big network moving and being manipulated in various kinds of ways and sort of seeing those connections for me visually in my head is sort of how I do this. And in fact, when I'm writing an esoteric script, often what I'm doing, aside from consulting primary and secondary sources, is that I'm trying to write out a narrative that captures that network and that explains all of those connections and puts you into that network so that you can sort of be inside the network and you can look over there and there's like, oh, that idea and that's connected to this pope and this is connected to this occultist and that's connected to the spiritual Franciscans. And so you can see from within and then you can begin to build that network yourself in the process of doing that. So that's how I do it. It's basically just like the cybernetic version of a memory palace. And if you want the old school version of memory palaces, you can read books like General Bruno's on the art of memory. There's a whole long list of text about the art of memory. I often find Bruno's stuff impenetrable, to be frank. That's why I've never made any episodes on it. I don't even know if I understand what he's talking about half the time. This might be too stupid for it or something, but that's how I do it. And that's how I structure esoterica episodes, both because I can't not, because that's how my mind works, but also I'm trying to put you into that network so that you begin to see how things are connected. And I think for folks who've been hanging out here and watching esoterica episodes, you probably have already begun to notice that pretty early on they begin to talk to each other and not just the jokes. I mean, the jokes too, of course, but like esoteric episodes are talking to each other. And so that talking to each other again is trying to keep the lattice of that network building and building and building, so that by the time you watch an episode on Enochian, you're already getting some like shout outs to philosophy of language. The philosophy of language stuff is also to give some shout outs to this, and you're seeing that network beginning to build up. And I think that if you watch enough esoterica content, you'll begin to see that that's how I'm doing things, and that's also a function of just how I'm a structuralist thinker. That kind of cybernetic way of thinking is born out of my commitment to structuralism and how structuralism really dominates or shapes the way that I think about the world in general. And so that structuralist way of thinking, it's both how my mind works, but also it's how I philosophically frame topics and discussions in the video. So it's a long answer, but I hope that helps. I hope that helps. Thank you, Plastic Bubble. It's like Homer Simpson going through the hedge. That's one of the best episodes with like it's like Flanders is like T-1000 from Terminator. I remember seeing that episode as a kid. Oh man, old school Simpsons. That was good stuff. That was good stuff. This is a random one that I see here. Elaborating with or collaborating with Dan McClellan. Yes, I'd love to work with Dan. We've exchanged some emails and we've kind of talked about it. We don't really work on the same kinds of things, really. But I will say that Dan does something really, really incredible, and he does something that I wouldn't do. I don't do any debunking videos on principle. I just don't do any debunking videos, and I will say that Dan does them incredibly well. They're funny, they're incredibly thoughtful. He manages to cover an enormous amount of depth very quickly, and I'm always come away very impressed with how elegantly McClellan is able to uh, debunk something, um, or reshape a misunderstanding or something like that. So yeah, folks, if you're interested in sort of I don't know, debunking dubious claims about the Bible and Christianity and the New Testament and the Hebrew Bible, Dan McClellan is absolutely your guy. Absolutely, you guys. Fantastic content. Joseph Smith Mormon episode update. Speaking of I think McClellan is a member of the LDS Church. I think that's right. I'm not sure. I think he is. I'd love to hear more about his own relationship to the LDS Church because I find the LDS Church to be fascinating. When I was out in Utah, I really had a fantastic time hanging out with LDS folks and learning more about their religion. And again, like people love to make fun of them, and I always love it when Christians are making fun of LDS people, and I'm like, really? Like, come on! Like, making fun of people's religions is kind of a lark. At any rate, it's coming. I don't know when I'm going to get to it. I need to read reread that giant book on early Mormonism and magic. So it's coming. I just don't know when I'm going to have when I'm going to have time to get here. But yes, I do want to do it, mostly because I'm just interested in it. Maybe I can bring. Again, assuming that Dan McClellan is a member of the LDS Church, which I believe he is, and I could be wrong about that. However, um, um, and which is to me all the more impressive that he's, again, he has this podcast, Data Over Dogma, and again, I probably have a kindred spirit in his relationship to his religion and perhaps my relationship to mine, and the fact that we both prioritize evidence in our scholarly endeavors, and we're able to put our faith agenda, I suppose, on one side. Let's see here. So I saw something. Yeah, I'll answer this one. Would you consider revisiting the topic of Rabbi Yehuda of Lo, the Maharal? I don't think so, because the Maharal never built a golem. In fact, that entire legend was invented in the 19th century by a non-Jewish person. So, and it just shows that people continue to believe it, mostly because the Prague tourism people really want you to believe it because they make a lot of money on golem tourism. But the Maharal of Prague was the least likely person to have made a golem. I mean, and this also just shows you that no one really reads these people, because if you read what the Maharal wrote, he's like a Talmudist and halachist. He's not. He has some interesting Kabbalah because everyone did, but Kabbalah Masit, like practical Kabbalah, he would have found usser, like totally forbidden and beyond the pale. So it's a story invented in the 19th century by a non-Jewish person to tell a great fictional story, but it's not actually anchored in any history. Not to say golem making, of course, is rooted in history, but not the specific claim of the Maharal. Although it is interesting that like Orthodox people have now also picked up this idea and run with it, and so you have this entire cottage industry of like Orthodox Jewish people back creating the Maharal story of the making of the Golem of Prague, despite the fact that it's just made up out of whole cloth by a non-Jewish person in the 19th century. History is so crazy. But no, I don't think I'll do an episode on the Prague Golem, just because there wasn't a Prague Golem. And yeah, I might do one on other golems. There are lots of other golems. Solomon ibn Gabirol allegedly had a golem housekeeper. I could use a golem housekeeper. Face, thank you so much for the super sticker. I really appreciate that. Really appreciate that. Yeah, Snowfox, thank you so much for your super stick as well. Yeah, thank you for the book list. Yes, I hope folks find the book list to be useful. It's been a long time in making to make that book list, but I really do hope that it empowers and enables y'all who are many of y'all are autodidacts. It gives you a good foundation by which to go and do the learning on your own. And some people have asked, like, well, you don't have any practitioner books on there. Of course I don't, because I'm not a practitioner, and who am I to pick one practitioner book over and against another? It's way out of my lane, and I think it's important for folks to stay in their lane. And so I'm not able to recommend those texts because I don't have a expertise. Why would I give expertise to things why would I recommend stuff where I don't have much expertise or any? So, but I would encourage my practitioner folks out there, make a similar list. If you're really into Enochian magic and you think that this book is better than that one, by all means, make these curated bibliographies. The more curated bibliographies that are actually driven by uh, by the desire for good information, all the better. I mean, this is a great thing that Denis Poisson does over at Foolish Fish. Really gives great book recommendations, and so I would highly recommend that. Yeah, I would highly recommend that folks build their own lists. Absolutely worth it. Hi, Vincent. Thank you. Why did cultures independently all create sky snake mythology or thunder versus rivers? Um, I don't know that all cultures did that. I would be very, very slow to talk about all cultures. Lots of cultures develop, snake mythology, but I'm sure that there are lots that don't. And I would say that things like sky mythology, it's just the biggest thing around. Like I think that people, right? You write what you know. You generate mythology based on what you experience. And I think that a ubiquitous experience for all human beings, there's a sky above them, and it seems big, and it's full of weird things like lights, and it gets dark and light, and there are, lights up there, and the weather comes from it, and it's quite dangerous. And so I think it's totally unsurprising that people spend a lot of time thinking about the sky, just because it's the main character. I mean, human beings love to think that they're the main character, but human beings, if you think about it from sort of a primitive, and I use primitive not in a pejorative sense here, but primitive in the sense of archaic. In an archaic way of being in the world, you are not the main character. You are a very tiny fragment, of tiny little sliver. I love Hildegard of Bingen's that we're a mote of dust floating in the air, and that is the soul, the littleness of human beings, and the sky is so big, and you're reliant upon it, and it is so dangerous, and it's so weird, and it's totally unsurprising why it would feature in so many mythologies. But again, I'm not going to say all because I don't know every mythology, not by any means, not by any means. Right. Traveling man, thank you. As a Freemason from a Prince Hall Grand Lodge, I find your podcast interesting and compelling and very informative. Thank you. Could you please do a podcast on Freemasonry's esoteric history and knowledge? I've given a lot of thought about this, and part of the reason why I have not made one yet is because I don't know much about Freemasonry. Although I will say that all the Freemasons that I've ever met and the ones that I've interacted with have always been stand-up people. So I've come to develop a admiration for Freemasonry because most, if not all, of the Freemasons I've met have been kind, thoughtful, virtuous people. So I have an appreciation for Freemasonry because of the people that I've met who've engaged with it. But also part of the reason why I haven't made any content about Freemasonry is that it's too late for me. Esoterica really goes up to about 1650. And then there are sort of forays into modernity just based on random interests of mine or random expertise that I might have. But Freemasonry is such a enormous field all on its own that it's not a lark of an episode. You couldn't just sort of do a one-off on Freemasonry because the history is so long, it's so complicated. teasing out the mythology versus the history is quite complicated. And then the intersection of Freemasonry with the many very different streams of esotericism is simply so complicated that one could just do a channel about that. So the combination of it being very late, or being relatively late for the channel, and its enormous complexity means that the odds of me getting to do episodes on Freemasonry are pretty low, at least anytime soon. Now, who knows what the channel will be like in 5 years? I don't know. But at this point, there's just much more Renaissance and medieval and ancient stuff I want to cover and need to cover before I ever get to there. So, I mean, God, I still have the Pistis Sophia episode. I can feel the Brill Pistis Sophia book over there staring at me. I still have that to do. So that's part of the reason why I haven't covered much in the way of Freemasonry. However, I will need to do what is covered in this time period is Rosicrucianism, at least some Rosicrucianism, and so I'll be at least covering them at some point soon. So that's kind of why I haven't covered much in the way of Freemasonry. I don't know a lot about it because it's not within the realm of that I work in, and it's so sophisticated and complex that it would require, I mean, a huge amount of content to cover it adequately. Thank you. Speaking of Masons, thank you, Mason Clements. Super sticker. Appreciate that. Right. Get the rest of these, and I'll try to get some of the non super thanks ones. Hey, Shane from Ireland. That's a country I really want to get back to. I really want to get back to Ireland. I really enjoyed my time there last time I was there. Just an absolutely beautiful country with such an amazing history. Have you come across many interesting occult tattoos that really stood out? I'm trying to think. I've seen a lot of tattoos. I've been consulted on a lot of them. I don't do any consulting on tattoos, folks. I get emails maybe on the weekly asking me to like look at some sigil or check some Hebrew or something. I don't do it at all. Period. If you don't understand what you're putting on your body and you're getting an outside consultant, then you shouldn't. Well, I say shouldn't. It's your body. You can do what the hell you want to with it, but you should think about that a little more. If you don't know what it is, then you should think more about why you're getting it permanently put into your flesh. I guess the only time that tattoos really jump out to me is when there's like a bad mistake in them, like when Hebrew is like. I see sometimes I've seen Hebrew that's like spelled backwards or like mirror imaged. Um, or letters get confused. They confuse a vav with a nun sofit, or a chet with a hey or something like that. And I never have the wherewithal to like tell them that their Hebrew tattoo is misspelled or mirror imaged. I think I saw someone who told me that they had the I forget what it was. Maybe it was the word Michael tattooed on them, and then it was like mirror imaged, like the tattoo artist had mirror imaged it incorrectly, and it was like, yeah, I don't know what to do with them. Kind of made me sad. But yeah, so I've seen up several, but nothing really jumps out to me as like a especially interesting or cool tattoo. I'm not really into tattoos. It's not really my thing. Um, I get why people do them, but they're not really my thing. But yeah, also like I said, you should think twice about getting a tattoo if you like don't know what it says. Armando with a question about Freemasonry. Yep, just talked about that. Enjoy this experience, friends. It's optional. Yes. Thank you. This is one randomly. Scriptural context, best intro and translation of Sepher Yetzirah. Best intro and best translation is Tzahi Weiss. Tzahi Weiss has the best book, in my opinion, on Sepher Yetzirah. You can find it in my list, on the list of books that's in the chat. You'll find it. Did I put it in there? Make sure I actually did put it in there. Kawa. Sepher Yetzirah. Yes, yeah, it's in there. So yeah, just look for the Weiss Sepher Yetzirah and its contexts. In my opinion, that's the best book on the Sepher Yetzirah, and it includes translations of the Vatican manuscript and the Gra, I think. I don't remember exactly, but it contains two different translations of what are thought to be some of the best texts. So, but yeah, that's the best introduction to Sepher Yetzirah, in my opinion. The R.A. Kaplan is great, but well, it's good. The problem with the Kaplan edition of Sepher Yetzirah is that he um, interpolates Lurianic Kabbalah back onto Sepher Yetzirah. Sepher Yetzirah was written 1,000 years before Lurianic Kabbalah, any Kabbalah existed. So it was written, in the 7th or 8th century of the Common Era. And Kabbalah doesn't really emerge. Lurianic Kabbalah doesn't emerge until the 16th century. And what Kaplan does is he transposes Lurianic Kabbalah back onto Sepher Yetzirah, and it's not always a good fit, and it doesn't always make a lot of sense. And that there's a reason for that, and the reason very simple is because they're not related texts and they're not related ideas at all. Um, so that's fine for a Kabbalist to do. It's not fine for an academic or a scholar trying to understand the text of Sefer Yetzirah in its historical context. And honestly, while that book is often quite good, Kaplan's Sefer Yetzirah, it often makes bizarre claims that are simply not true of Sefer Yetzirah. So so yeah, it's a necessary, it's a good reading, but you have to take it with a lot of care, especially if you've never studied Sefer Yetzirah on its own, and if you've never studied Lurianic Kabbalah on its own. I think that it gives you a false sense of how those two texts um, relate historically. It's interesting because the copy of Sefer Yetzirah that I have, the R.A. Kaplan one, was given to me by a Catholic priest. It's one of the, I think it may have been the very first esoteric book that I ever owned. Is that right? It might be. It might be the case that that was the first esoteric book I ever owned, and it was given to me by a Catholic priest, fellow named Father Brian, who lived in our neighborhood. I think he was a parish priest in the area, the part of Jackson that I lived in. Super kind guy, very very nice. We used to hang out over there and like at his house, the parsonage, and talk about Thomas Aquinas and stuff. But he gave it to me, and I remember he gave it to me, and he said, "I can't make heads or tails of this book. Maybe you can." And I've been trying to ever since. Trying to ever since. All right. Let me scroll down and get. During your stream with Litwa, Hermetic books around 500 BC were mentioned. Can you elaborate on what is considered the oldest Hermetic text or authors? Was it a pure Egyptian, pure Greek transition? So the oldest texts that we think of as being Hermetic in the very broad sense of that term are texts that are now translated as conversations in the Book of Life. They're written in Demotic. They have some connection to the book, the houses of life, the temples, the ancient Egyptian temples, and because they're connected to Hermes and no, not Hermes, to Thoth, they are probably coming out of the same milieu that will eventually produce something like Hermeticism. And so those texts are the conversations of the Book of Life, but I don't think they date to 500 BCE. They date to, we don't know when they date to, honestly, sometime on the hinge of the Common Era, maybe. But those are the earliest, I think, of the Hermetic texts. I have an episode about them, the books of Thoth, and although the modern translation has them called the Conversations in the House of Life. I will say that they are very difficult to understand. I've read through them several times, and I still have no good idea what they mean. One, because they were insider baseball for Egyptian priests. They were initiatory texts for Egyptian priests, so they weren't meant for like normies. And so that's one thing that makes them difficult. And two, they're fragmentary. The remains of them are quite fragmentary, unfortunately. And so the condition of the manuscript also proves deleterious in trying to interpret the content. So, but quite fascinating, but also quite difficult to make sense of. Hey, Paul, good to see you. Good to see you. Thank you for the super sticker. I appreciate that. All right, some more down here at the bottom. Oh, great. So we got to all the super stickers. So let me try to get some questions just to go in the chat. All right. The conversation in the House of Life. What do I make with the chemistry setup behind me? I make alchemical stuff. I recreate alchemical experiments. So I look at old manuscripts or old alchemical texts, and I try to recreate them sometimes with varying degrees of success. So I'm going to eventually do more of those, like I did with the alchemical cure for melancholy. But I have a lot of alchemical books, and I'm going to be recreating some of those experiments at some point in the future. So look for more forensic alchemy content to come. Also, I could just stick wine in there and make brandy, I suppose. Good for after dinner drinks. All right, let me grab some other questions up here. If Freemasonry is too late for your timeline, why do you cover Marxism, which came later? Because I know a lot about Marxism. And it was May Day. So I was like, I want to do a random episode on Marx because it's my channel. I can do what I want. Would you consider adding some Asiphilae atheology material to your reading list? Probably not. I mean, that's like really contemporary stuff. And I think honestly, by the time you get that into Bataille, I mean, assuming you don't read French, the 10 books about Bataille in English, you know where they are. So I don't think that I would cover them. So, but no, I don't think I'll add contemporary stuff at least at any time soon, like the Bataille stuff to the list. Have I ever covered Druidry? Not the modern version of Druidry. I have not. I don't do much in the way of ancient paganism, especially when it doesn't intersect with like philosophy more broadly. Someone like Proclus and Iamblichus. Also, we don't know anything about Druidry. Like we can basically lay out in one page everything that we know about Druidry. We don't know anything about what they were doing. So and it's all through Romanized mostly, and a few inscriptions. So we know precious little about what the Druids are up to, and so it would be a relatively brief episode, I think, if I were to make one. But no, I don't think I'll make one about Druidry. There is a good one out there on YouTube, and now the content creator is slipping my mind who did it. I can even see the thumbnail of their episode. It wasn't the Histocrat, but it was one of those channels, I think, like that. They did a good episode on Druidry. And also, when there's a good episode on it, I just don't feel the need to do it. I don't want to, like, unless they do one that's like really bad, there's not a lot of reason to do it. But I can't remember whose channel it was on. But there's a good one out there. Have you reviewed Hela Hunt Hendricks of Liturgy's Theology and that she's been writing? I got to meet Hunt Hendricks way back in the day when I was living in New York, and it was really a fantastic conversation. And yeah, I'd love to have her on and talk about sort of black metal theology or post theology, but I haven't followed any of the newer stuff. I heard that she wrote an opera, which was supposed to be really good, and but I haven't listened to any of the new stuff. So no, it's super fascinating work. And as much as people like trash the black metal manifesto that she wrote, I thought it was thought provoking and interesting, and quite interesting. So, but yeah, I'd love to have her on the channel. I'd just like to talk to her again. I think she's a fantastically brilliant person and well worth well worth. Oh, Angela's in the chat. Hey, Angela. Yeah, Angela, you covered some Druidry stuff. Yeah, it's again, I don't really cover like ancient paganism stuff, and I know that Dan Trell also has been covering some stuff on Roman religion. He's given several lectures. He's teaching a class, I think, on Roman religion, and he's been releasing his class on Roman religion slowly over the course of things on his Patreon. So so worth checking out there. But I don't do much in that direction. It's not where I have much expertise. Hi, Philip. I'm going to come back to Philip in a second. Philip's been on an awesome adventure from Let's Talk Religion, doing some cool travels and stuff, making me super jealous. Any views on authors such as Colin Wilson or Lyle Watson and their attempts to merge paranormal and scientific experiences? I don't know who they are. Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry. I don't know who these folks are. So I hate to. I wish there was a way to like refund people's super thanks or super questions when I have literally no idea. I suppose it's contemporary people, but I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't have any opinion because I don't know who they are. Would you consider doing an episode on Cicero's De Natura Deorum? Yes, I want to do. I want to do an entire episode actually on Cicero as the esoteric Cicero. Yeah, I want to do an entire episode on the esoteric Cicero because I do think Cicero has a lot of really cool stuff about divination and things like that. So I do want to do a whole episode on the esoteric Cicero. So definitely going to that's going to be coming down the pike. So I have that in the back of my mind as as an episode. But Philip is over there in the chat asking the big questions, and this is the kind of question that I love. Who would win in a fight, Augustine versus Origen? And the answer to that, I'm pretty sure, is Augustine. I can imagine Augustine being a brawler. Origen, nah, dude's a thinker. He's really like a he's not a pugilist. Augustine, I think, would fight you. I think he would fight you. So I think definitely Augustine. Although you got to give it to Origen. I mean, assuming the stories about him emasculating himself are true, which there's some debate about whether that's true or not. That's a hell of a thing to do because um, you got to really have commitment to do that. Seems to me for religious reasons. There's lots of other reasons that one could to do that. There are for lots of reasons, but I don't know. I'm going with Augustine. I'd love to see a cage fight between Augustine and maybe Augustine and Saint Nicholas would be a good fight. Saint Nicholas, he was also kind of a brawler in the whole Arian and dispute, but I'm going with Augustine. Thomas too would be interesting. Thomas versus Augustine, because Thomas was kind of a big guy as well. He was like kind of a sumo wrestler type, I think. So that could also be a good fight. This would be a great like Street Fighter game. It's like Mortal Kombat, but it's just like religious figures. Like Elijah from Hebrew Bible. Like Elijah, I think would be a brawler too. And like Elisha could like his superpower weapon could be like he sticks bears on you. That'd be amazing. There absolutely should be there absolutely should be a fantastic like Street Fighter game that's just and a back. Sorry, folks. Like my internet hicked up or something. So hopefully, let me know if you can see me and hear me again in the chat. I don't know if I've returned back to the live or not. Yes. Also, someone mentions Plato. Yeah, Andrew, you're right. Plato's was a wrestler. In fact, Plato is his nickname. Platon, broad shouldered. Plato would absolutely be whipping people and taking names. So No, definitely Plato would be a brawler for sure. Okay, enough of this. Although I find it to be very hilarious, and I wish this video game would exist. Any historical connection between Asherah and Lady Wisdom and Asherah and the Holy Spirit? Um, Asherah and the lady, like the encapsulation of wisdom in the Proverbs. I don't know. I don't think there's much of a connection. I think the Asherah worship stuff. Um, I think most of it had come to an end by the time a lot of those texts got written down. It was a memory more than it was an active process. I think it was much more like a later. It was much more into the Iron Age, and I think that the scriptures are actually written down. A Hebrew Bible was written down so late that most of that stuff was probably a memory by then. But no, I don't think there's much connection between Asherah and the encapsulation of wisdom that you see in Mishle. I mean, Proverbs, and definitely not by the time you get to the Holy Spirit. I don't think that. I think by then Asherah is absolutely a memory. Absolutely a memory. But we don't really know. There's not good evidence about when exactly like Baal worship ended in the Canaan. We do know, of course, it went on for a long time among the Phoenicians, Melkart and stuff. But actually, in the Shvelah in Judea, when was sort of the end of Baal worship or Asherah worship? There's a lot of debate about exactly when that came to an end and when Yahwism became Yahwism became sort of the standard, the only religion, the monolatous religion of that region. Probably in the exilic period. Are you familiar with ghosts and the esoteric symbolism they put into their music and videos and such? I'm not. I know that they do that. I know I've seen some music videos and I've seen some imagery on their album covers, but I've never looked at them very, very closely. So no, I don't know much about about the way they use esoteric imagery. So no, I don't know much about that. Right. Yeah, Full Metal Alchemist is another thing that I have never watched, and I need to watch it because obviously, but I don't know anything about Full Metal Alchemist. So and I've heard that like Paracelsus features prominently in the anime, and this is like a thing where I just don't know anything about the anime, and I need to watch it. Is it very long? It's like a series, like it's the kind of thing that I could like. I wish it were just a movie. I could just watch it in one day, but sometimes these series just take forever, and like Dragon Ball Z, there are 50,000 of them. There's no way I'm going to watch that. So what are your thoughts on the Elaster or the Elias artist in alchemy? Would you ever consider Spider doing a video of them? The Elaster is there's a lot of debate about exactly what the Elaster is, and Paracelsus, because he uses those terms. This is one of the words he makes up, like the Archaeus and all these weird, strange words that Paracelsus makes up. I probably won't do a whole episode on the Elaster, but I will probably mention the Elaster in the next video about the Paramirum, because it does get a mention in the Paramirum. He doesn't describe what it is, of course, because it's Paracelsus. But I will do an episode, the next episode about Paracelsus and the Paramirum. The Elaster will be one of the things that gets mentioned because it's sort of one of the fundamental substructures or superstructures rather of reality, and so it'll get a mention. It'll get a mention. What's your take on the Metatron's cube and how it relates to Platonic sagas? I've never understood anything about this like modern Metatron cubes, 20th century stuff. I guess it doesn't have anything connection, as far as I can tell, to actual historical Metatron. Like historical texts about Metatron never mention any of that stuff, so I have no idea. It's like some 20th century stuff that someone made up. Now, the fact that it's made up in the 20th century doesn't make it bad, because all the Metatron stuff and the ancient world was also made up. It was all made up at some point. So it's not that the fact that it was made up in the 20th century, it's just that I don't really do 20th century occultism at all. And so because I don't do 20th century Occultism, I don't really work in that material, so I don't know anything about it. It's just like too modern, way too modern. Um, in Kabbalah, what are your thoughts on the Frankists? In the way of Esau, as it may relate to Christianity and Islam. I'm going to cover the Frankists at some point, but I will say that I just hate Jacob Frank. I find him to be an absolutely detestable human being, who ruined hundreds of people's lives, basically for his own edification. He's just like a psychopath. I find him to be a dreadful human being. But yeah, I'll come back and do an episode on the Frankists at some point. There's a new book out apparently about the Frankists, written by a Polish author that I heard is really good. I haven't read yet. I mean, I've read the Machenko text on the Wars of the Lord on Paracelsus on Frank, but I don't know. I think that most people are only interested in Frankism because it's just wrapped up in their like anti-Semitic conspiracy theory stuff. And part of the reason why part of the reason why I'm just like don't want to cover it is because it feeds into so much like 2-bit anti-Semitism that I'm like, it's like so like if you're gonna be an anti-Semite, at least be interesting, and it's like not with the Frankist conspiracy theory stuff. But yeah, I'll get to it at some point. Oh, Frank, I wish he could have been shot. All right. Frater Zygmunt. I hear a lot of talk about the Hebrew used in the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, but never from a Hebrew speaker. Any thoughts? So what is Atama? Yeah, I haven't looked at the Hebrew of that. I do know that I think I looked at one version of it and the Hebrew was misspelled. There was a mem sofit in the middle of a word, which if you read Hebrew, it's just like laughably bad. Like, how can something have magical powers if it's spelled by a 4-year-old? Like check your Hebrew, check it early and often. But I haven't looked at that text in a while because it's again relatively modern, and so it's not the thing that I work on, quite frankly. But in general, anytime I see Hebrew in occultism, I know it's going to be hilarious. I mean, there are so many. Agrippa makes so many blunders in his Hebrew, either because he didn't really understand Hebrew very well, or because the printer didn't understand it, or both of them didn't really understand it. But the Hebrew often in an occult material is just like laughably bad. And then often it's laughably bad because it's just not there. For instance, I see all kinds of books on the Klipot. I'll go back to the Klipot because it's just like the thing that I see. I'll see books on the Klipot that don't have any quotations from like the Zohar. And if they do mention the Zohar, there's no evidence they actually read it in Aramaic, because often the Aramaic of the Zohar is there's technical weird stuff going on in there, and you just can't quote it out of context without really knowing the actual text. And so that's another good sign that the book doesn't have any connection to historical texts on this. But yeah, maybe if folks can post a link to it, I can take a look at it and see what's going on in it. But I haven't looked at the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram because it's so new. Right. It's funny that what's new and what's not. Sometimes I think this about Wicca, like how new of a religion Wicca is, and people have said, "Well, will you cover Wicca?" I'm like, "No, it's a brand new religion. It's like way too new for the channel." And many people are sort of taken aghast by this because one of the myths that gets told about Wicca by Wiccans is that it's the oldest religion in the world. Of course, that's completely made up modern day mythology. But yeah, yeah, I find it's just interesting to me that it's too new that I haven't done it yet, or that I won't. That's a great material for Angela Puka. Like, she does all that material so well. I let her do it, not because I let her do it, because she's just really good at it, and that's her expertise. So, folks, you guys need to be subscribing and supporting Angela Puka. Dr. Puka's absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. It's a good one. Have you ever thought about doing an episode on and I never pronounce this correctly, the the dreams of Poliphilus and blah blah blah, whatever. The great book published by Aldous, and typically considered to be the most beautiful book ever printed. I think that's right. Actually, I would say that it's one of the most beautiful books ever printed. Yeah, I will definitely do an episode on that. Definitely do an episode on the whatever the struggle of dreams of Polypheus. So absolutely going to do an episode on that. All right. Let me grab a couple more. I'm going to be on for just a few more minutes. Just because, yeah, wow, it's already been an hour and a half. All right, folks, these are going to be so super random what I pick out, or maybe they'll just be like whatever one strike me as like the most interesting. Here we go. Have I ever read the Red Book by Carl Jung? No. No, I've read Jung stuff on alchemy, and that's it. Is that right? That's it. Maybe I've read the Seven Sermons. No, I've read the Seven Sermons of the Dead. I've read that a long time ago. That's good, actually. It's interesting, but I haven't read the Red Book. Nope. How would you rate exorcism in the Balkans compared to similar parts of the world? I don't know anything about exorcism in the Balkans. That's way out of my. No, sorry, I don't know anything about that. Interesting topic, though. Thank you, Mr. Something Else, for the super sticker. Thank you. All right. Let me scroll back up and grab some questions from earlier in the chat. Let's see here. Someone mentioned pseudo-Empedocles. I'm going to be doing an episode on pseudo-Empedocles. That's super interesting stuff. Yeah, this is a good one from Genghis Galahad. Any coverage on the Shekinah? Yeah, I need to do a whole episode on the Shekinah. That's a fantastic idea. Yeah, I'm going to definitely do an episode just on her, the feminine presence of God. That's that'd be a really, really great idea. So yes, definitely do an episode on the Shekinah. All right. Sorry, folks. I'm just reading through some of these questions to grab some of them. So this one's the obligatory one that I definitely have to do on most live streams. I do not have any practice or belief in the occult. My interests are totally academic. Yeah, so it's a very boring part of my life. That the channel's academic. My interest is totally academic, not related to any sort of practical stuff. All right. Sorry, folks. I'm just looking through the chat to grab a couple of other ones. What is my opinion about UFO disclosure? I would love for the government to put out everything they know about UFOs and UAPs, but I am very, very doubtful that whatever. I think most all the UAP stuff I've seen is just like parallax and FLIR problems. I don't think it's evidence of any sort of advanced technology. Also, I just don't think that I haven't seen any compelling evidence that extraterrestrials have or could reach us, and I don't think we ever will reach them. I think it's very unlikely we will ever reach them. I think it's also unlikely they can reach us. So I think yeah, I think we're probably not alone in the universe. It's probably other extraterrestrial life, but I don't think there's any compelling evidence to believe. And there's lots of good physics to think that that they're not going to reach us and we're not going to reach them. I just don't think people really have a grasp of how big the universe is. I think that's the problem when people say things like, "Oh, they can just fold space," and they always like do the thing in the movies where they take a piece of paper and fold it in half and stick a pencil through it. And they're like that, and I'm like, that's not how space works. That's not how any of that works. And also like people don't really have a grasp of like basic relativity, and so people say things like we can travel 10th the speed of light. And I'm like, that's much easier said than done. And so yeah, I think with all the problems that go along with relativity, I don't think that we're gonna find extraterrestrial life, and I don't think they're gonna find us. And I think that all the videos that have been leaked and shown are mostly mistakes because of parallax or mistakes because of FLIR. And there's some good YouTube videos that show that. And again, I'm an Occam's razor guy. I'm a do not multiply entities beyond necessity. I'm on that Occam life. So that's my axe, that's my bag, and so I'm really about that. Yeah, but yeah, I'd love to see actually. It's like, yeah, if aliens were real, I would just like them to like again just like land at the land in the Super Bowl. That would be great. But they don't seem to want to do that. So yeah, like I said, I'm pretty skeptical. I'm pretty skeptical of them. What's your stance on the possibility of religious innovation? Is there such a thing, or is it always hidden source? Maybe a question of historiography. I think every generation does religious innovation. I think that the people who claim to be doing traditionalism are often the most innovative. And so I don't know of a generation of people that simply inherits religious and spiritual technologies from the past and simply does them again. I think every generation is heavily adapting and heavily reconstituting their spiritual and religious technologies in the environment of the singularity of their lives, the singularities of the position and time they're in. So I would say that traditionalism is as much as I'm actually enamored of traditionalism, especially vis-a-vis the realism, I'm quite sympathetic to traditionalism. But I would say that it's a completely modern idea. Completely modern idea. That there's no one more modest and there's no one more modern than the people claiming to be the most traditional. And so when I see the trad life stuff, I'm like, there's nothing more radically postmodern than like trad people. Like it's like, and this is like the Zizekian moment, pure ideology. But yeah, I find that the people who try to be trad are the most postmodern. Like postmodernist people now look kind of quaint compared to the trad people in their postmodernity. So that's why I love people who are like, I'm going back in time and doing things like my ancestors. I'm like, you're doing nothing like your ancestors because we don't know what ancestors did. And secondly, the self-conscious desire to do that is born out of an extremely modern sense of alienation, and the doing of that is hyper postmodern. So I've often found the traditionalism and trad life stuff, like there's something deeply ironic about it that I just like. I don't know. I just love that. I love how deeply ironic it is. And the fact that they're doing it without recognizing the irony, it's just so good. It's just so good. So good. Hi, Nama. Shabbos. Thank you for the great content. I'd love to have you react to a great sketch about the prophet Jeremiah. I could try. I mean, my modern Israeli Hebrew is not great, but that'd be funny to do. Jeremiah, the emo prophet, him and Paul, just like always, like I just always imagine like Jeremiah and Paul, like with their runny mascara, just crying all the time, being so upset, and like Jeremiah and Paul, they're great. So yeah, yeah. If you can send it to me, Nama, I would be happy to take a look at it. Like I said, I'm not sure how great my modern Hebrew is. All right, a couple of more. Someone say that they channeled Schopenhauer. Why would you do that? Now that would be great. There's a YouTuber named John David Ebert who claimed to have talked to Schopenhauer through a medium. That would be so great to talk to Schopenhauer. That would be fantastic. I would love to talk to Schopenhauer. But you have to be careful around him. He pushed you down the stairs. If I ever fall down a bunch of stairs, it's because I tried to conjure Schopenhauer. He's far scarier than any demon. He just push you down the stairs. Trad life. Jesus stuff, man. People get up to some weird stuff on the internet. Like of all like the weird stuff that people get up to, I'm like, I'm gonna be like super trad. Oh man. Let's see. This is a good one. Oops. That's so funny. Someone asked, am I superstitious? You keep picking the wrong one. Am I superstitious? Not terribly. Not terribly superstitious, I don't think. No. I should cultivate more. More superstitions. Hey, Tara, what language would Christ speak if he came back to America? I guess he would speak Aramaic. I don't know. I mean, if he's the resurrected Jesus, I imagine he can do whatever he damn well pleases. But I imagine if it was like actual Jesus, like actual historical Jesus, he would be speaking his Galilean Aramaic, which I always loved the idea that Jesus spoke what at that time was considered to be sort of a hillbilly accent. Like the Galilean accent was at some level thought to, it was kind of a remote bumpkin accent that the Jerusalemites, those fancy people in Jerusalem, they would have made fun of it, and it was recognizable as a sort of a bumpkin accent. The whole Galilee was considered to be the Amcha, that's full of the Amharites, the sort of rednecks or whatever, the hillbillies. And so I always loved the idea that if you were to hear Jesus speak back in the day, he would sound like like if you're from America, he would sound like a rural, like redneck person. I always imagine him like sounding like a hillbilly. So like I always like when I want to hear the voice of Jesus, I imagine the way that like Popcorn Sutton talked of blessed memory, and I imagine him talking like that, but in Aramaic. So that's the way I kind of think of Jesus. He would have spoken a dialect of Aramaic that would have been recognizable as like rural, something like that. Yeah, I always like that idea that Jesus was kind of a redneck. Considering I come from Mississippi, come from like, I'm a redneck. So I always appreciate the fact that Jesus was a sort of like Popcorn Sutton kind of accent, but speaking Aramaic, obviously. Oh Jesus, what a great guy! I need to do an episode about my vision of Jesus, because I have a vision of Jesus that I was taught when we were in Haarlem, in Holland, not Harlem in New York, but I was with Philip and Zevi, and I sort of like dropped my theory of Jesus on them, and they were both kind of like shocked a little bit. So maybe I should make an episode about my vision of Jesus, like my understanding of the historical Jesus, because I haven't seen one quite like it. So maybe that's an episode I'll do, is like what do I think about Jesus? Because I think he gets really weirdly misunderstood for lots of, well, obviously for lots of reasons. But spoiler alert, I don't think he was like a hippy dippy love everybody guy. I think his vision of what he was up to was a lot more narrow than people often think of him. Also, another episode about Jesus I want to make is that James Tabor, who's going to be coming on the show, by the way. James Tabor is a scholar that really changed my life. But Professor James Tabor has made a version of Q, and Q is Quella, the gospel that some of the synoptics draw from. And I'm going to make an episode about Q and like what we actually know about Jesus if we had Q. Not that Q was an actual book or it really existed or whatever. And there's a lot of debates around whether Q scholarship now is all over the place. I think M. David Litwa is also very skeptical of Q stuff. That's because he's on like Marcion camp and studies a lot of Marcion stuff. But yeah, I'm gonna do an episode on Q and sort of what we know about Jesus from Q, in Q alone, which is interesting. I think it's interesting. But yeah, what's his name? Like I said, Professor Tabor has produced a version of it, so it's quite interesting. The sources for Galilee in Aramaic, mostly it's from the Talmud. We have old Talmud written in that dialect. And also we know of people from that time period with people commenting on the way they talked. So we know a good bit about it. I mean, you can you can see you can get a sense of what he sounded like from reading the Jerusalem Talmud. Some of those people speak in that dialect because they're from that part of they're from the Galilee. All right, folks. Just a couple of other questions. Then I'm going to jump off and go on a walk or something, or maybe take a nap. I'm pretty tired. This summoning Schopenhauer thing has piqued my interest. I'm going to go check that out. Of all the people to try to conjure, Schopenhauer's hilarious. He must have been angry. It's an interesting question. Having Damien Eccles on. I'd love to talk to Damien. I'm not sure what kind of work we could do together, but I would like to talk to him. I think he's an interesting guy, and we've had similar experiences in some ways. So if folks know and can get in contact with Damien Eccles, please put us in contact. That'd be great. I'd love to chat with him. All right. Have I ever read The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall? I have not. Not against 20th century stuff. I don't really work in 20th century stuff. Not to say that it's not important. And Manly P. Hall clearly was, a very learned guy and read deeply and, studied things in a profound way, especially given the fact that he had access to so little at that time. He really did a lot of work, but I've not read it. I flipped through it and it looks interesting, but I've not read it because, again, I don't really work in 20th century stuff so much. All right, folks. Let me see if there's anything here toward the end. Is cannabis mentioned in the Torah? Probably not. But we do have at least we have two instances of cannabis use archaeologically. There's the cannabis that was found in the lungs of a girl who was buried in I think Judea. Cannabis may have been used as like she had some kind of other problems. I forget exactly what she had. Something about a medical ailments, and there's some thinking that it was maybe used as an analgesic. And then of course we have Telerod. But no, the whole cannabosem idea that's cannabis, just it that you just don't really understand the roots of these words. One is a Semitic word and one is not, and so it's a false friend. And yeah, it's a false friend. It stems from a false friend relationship linguistically. All right, folks. I'm going to jump off. So what's coming up? Next week, we're going to be doing an episode on Mechthild of Magdeburg, very important mystic of the 13th century. Again, it's a great opportunity for me to be able to cover a lady mystic, a woman mystic. The women, of course, in the history of esotericism don't get nearly the coverage they deserve, and Mechthild is absolutely amazing. So we'll be covering Mechthild of Magdeburg and the Flowing Light of the Godhead, which is a fantastic name. It should be like a prog album, The Flowing Light of the Godhead. Following that, we're going to look at a Scandinavian like rune kabbalist from the early modern period, Boreas. So that's super weird and interesting stuff. That's going to be a collaboration with Animism, who's a really great guy. Runa is a really cool guy. And then after that, I think I'm going to do an episode on the god Seth, the Egyptian god Seth, because he's one of these characters lingering in the background of the rise of the demiurge, and there's a lot of interest in Seth, and so I don't know. I think his coverage is not really great, so I want to do a whole episode on the god Seth and how he became sort of an evil god, god of foreigners and stuff like that. So that's the next content creation cycle. Will be Mechthild, like Kabbalah rune stuff, and Seth, which is quite a combination. All right, folks. Well, again, thank you guys for hanging out with me, and thanks for the fantastic questions. I'm sorry when I don't have an answer, but it's better for me to say I don't know than to make something up. You can trust a scholar by how much they say they don't know things. So I'm happy to not know things, and there's no shame in not knowing, but there definitely is shame in pretending you know when you don't. So I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to the Agrippa class, and yeah, I just want to say again, thanks for everybody who's supporting the channel and making this possible, and thanks for your kind comments and all that. You guys make this all work, and I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity to learn with you all and to dive into some of this material and make it available and make it accessible. And that for any educator, that's the best thing in the world for us, is to be able to do the service of providing education to the community. And I'm really thankful for the opportunities to do that, and I really appreciate that I'm able to do that with you guys. So all right, folks, I'm going to jump off, and I'll see folks next week for an episode on Mechthild of Magdeburg and the flowing light of the Godhead. Until then, folks, you guys take care, and yeah, take it easy, take care of yourself, and oh yeah, happy Mother's Day for all the mamas out there. Thank you guys for being wonderful, amazing mothers. None of us get here without a mother. And so thank you for all the mothers that are out there, and much appreciation for the often unseen work that mothers do. The really heavy lifting that is done by the mothers. So thank y'all. Until next week with Mechthild, I'll see folks later on.